morning. Welcome to the craft room. I'm here with a blank picture frame. There I am. Hello. I'm looking at this blank picture frame for about 2 months now. It's a beautiful frame and I want to put something in it, and I'm going to make my own art. And I will just say I'm only terrified just a tiny bit. I went to the local Hobby Lobby craft store and I bought 2 different sheets of paper here. One is an expensive, the bigger one, Arches watercolor paper. It's like $9 for 1 sheet. And then this one is about 3 and change. And it's a mixed media kind of paper that has a tooth to it, just like a watercolor paper. I'm gonna practice on this one, and then I'm gonna do the real thing on that one. And just as you might expect, I've been going to the web and looking up pictures of art that I like. I like this loose and not so literal kind of look, a floral or a leaf kind of thing. So I'm gonna work with something like this to start off with. See, the first thing we're going to do here is get this out of here. And if you're new here, welcome. Oh, look at that. That's my girl. That's Jamie when Jamie was toothless, about 6 years old. This was a very old photograph. I didn't know that was in there. I guess I just turned it around. Anyway, I'm going to measure this from left to right. And I was saying, if you're new here, welcome. Every week of 2024, I am doing some sort of project here in the craft studio. And I am by no means a fine artist at all, but I do have a design sort of background and a graphic design eye. And so I feel like I can kind of figure this out and maybe show you as a crafter yourself that it's very doable to make some simple DIY art for your own home or your own space. Tiffany was telling me about this watercolor blob technique that she saw. I'm going to try to incorporate that type of thing, but into a composed piece of art. So wish me luck. We'll see. We're going to experiment together today. Than cutting my watercolor paper to size, because watercolor, this isn't the watercolor paper, this is the mixed media paper. If this turns out great, I'm keeping this. I'm going to trace the size that I need with just a pencil line, and then trim it out later. After it shrinks, I'll remeasure and see, rather than cutting the paper ahead of time. The question is, how do you get this from here to here? There's a number of ways. If you feel comfortable, you can just quickly do a very light pencil sketch. Most of us are probably not comfortable with that. If you are not, you can always print out that picture large, like to the scale of your actual art, and do like a tile printing like this. I had to manually do this in Photoshop Elements. I don't have a tiling feature. I just grabbed certain sections of the art in Photoshop and printed 8.5 by 11 at a time. And I can piece all this back together. This would be up here like this. So it fits into my size perfectly. And I would have to like tape all this together just so the way that it's supposed to be, and then transfer that onto my paper. You can do that with graphite or transfer paper or any of that, or you could actually just trace really hard through here and make an indentation onto your paper, or you could tape this up to, if you don't have a light box, which this is pretty thick, I don't know if I'm going to see through this, but you could try and tape this to, let's say, a big window or a sliding glass door that you have a lot of sunlight coming through, and make your own like homemade light box. I'm scared. I don't feel like I can hand sketch that to my liking. I'm going to do the taping together of the pieces, and how I would do that is just remove that where I know it's going to overlap, and then cut that bottom away because that's going to overlap as well, and grab some tape and tape these together. A little tape runner over here, and I noticed right away when I was going to lay this down that there's more to the top of this, but it's just blank. It's when I went to go print this out, I did not have it all the way to the top on that second piece, like the first piece here. So I'm just kind of lining up the image, and I got a little tape runner back here. That's okay. We can cover that up with a little scrap or something. I'm not going to worry about it. And then I've got my other two pieces here, which I will do the same with. I'm looking at that blue little bit over here, right here. You know, close enough. This does not have to be perfect. And I can get this under here, right about where it's supposed to go, like so. So I'll tape that. And then now I have something more like the size. So even if I didn't want to trace this and transfer it onto my paper, at least I have the proportions rather than trying to make that change from this small to that big piece of paper. I hope that makes sense. Pretty. I was just going to throw it away. I'm thinking I'm going to use that for something. I'm going to save that because I have a laser printer now, and it's very nice quality, and I don't have to worry about it being inkjet, and if it got wet or something, it would get ruined. This is super nice. Okay, so from here, we've got to get it onto our paper. If you don't have like transfer paper, and I don't think I do anymore, I used to, you can take very quickly any kind of pencil. Make your own little graphite situation back here. And you can do this over the whole back, but I'm going to do just section by section just to show you. So if I took that into the same place, let's say I'm right about here, and I drew that line again, and I don't have to push that hard this time, just a little bit, then we should see that transfer over onto my paper. Ever so slightly, which is perfect. Where you can take a little bit softer pencil. This is a 2H. Is that a soft or hard? I don't know. It's a graphite drawing pencil. I'm just going to go very, very light over that line before I lose where it is and what it's supposed to be defining here. So I'm going to go through and do all that. If you were really good, you could just start sketching blobs. You know, a lot of artists can do this. They can look at it, they can flip it, and then they can start to draw and flip it back and draw a little more and flip it back. You can try it. Before I get too much further is I made a little pencil mark where the corners of this big piece of paper is going to go, because every time I lift this up to do this and I go to lay it back down, we aren't sure where exactly that's going to be unless we have those guides. Just a second to scribble all in that back of that one quadrant. Line up my little tick marks in the corner there. And then I can continue to kind of draw my shapes. I'm not going to get too defined here, just to get the basic stuff. Maybe some divisions between things here, like this particular flower, I guess. And I'm not following it exactly. I'm doing my own thing. Some of this stuff I don't even know what it's supposed to be, but that's kind of the beauty of it. It's meant to be very kind of abstract and loose. And that is one thing I struggle with. I want things to be a little too perfect. So let's see how we're doing. You probably can't see it very well on camera. Yeah, it's way down here because I have such a small work table here. But I can see it. I can see all those little lines, and I'll go back over them with my graphite pencil. So I'll just continue on and get as much of this done as I can, and then I'll be back. Let's get down in here and take a look. This is my pencil sketching here. It's just very light. It looks a little darker on camera, but I am going to go back in just with a soft eraser and take out any extraneous little lines and marks that I really don't need. But you get the basic idea here. It's just very, very simplistic, and then we'll just let the watercolors kind of do their own thing here. I hope this doesn't bother you. That's sunlight coming through the blinds, and there's no way to keep that from happening. All right, so as far as paints go, I do have nice watercolor paints. These are Winsor & Newton, some are Cotman. I squeeze them into a palette. You can buy some of these palettes, you know, empty like this, and fill it. And then I shot a bunch of water in there. I have a little color code I go by. But do you have to have that? No. This is the basic watercolor, like koi watercolor set. You can get it at every craft store. It's very similar to some other ones that other companies carry. You can try that. You could do acrylic paint if you wanted to have a whole different look. You could water it down and give it a little thinner look. You know, this is just for fun. We are not professional artists, at least I'm not, and I just want a cool looking piece of art that I made myself. I'm still terrified, but that's okay. I've got a little mixing dish over here. I've got two things of water. One will be for washing the brush out. One will be for clear, clean water each time. And I've got several different size brushes. But basically what I'm going to do is a little like wet in wet, not so controlled technique here. So I'm going to take a large brush into clean, clear water. And I'm just going to loosely paint in this area where I want this first leaf to be, let's say. Okay. And I'm going to get it pretty wet because I'm working with mixed media paper. I don't know how it's going to react. It looks like it's sucking in there pretty quickly. So I'm going to be a little generous with that and hope that this flows nicely. If it doesn't, I would just do this again on watercolor paper. It'll be fine. All right, I'm going to grab a couple of greens and start mixing. And of course, I won't take you through every little step here, but just to get started, we'll just pick some random mix of two different greens in my palette, like a sap green and a hooker's green. And I'm just gonna start tapping it in there. And I want to get a lot of color so it'll flow all on its own and I don't have to mess with it too much. So let's get a little deeper green down there at the bottom. Now the paint blob technique that Tiffany was telling me about and saw on social media somewhere, it's much different than this, where they take the paint and they just let it blob onto watercolor paper in water and just let it flow, and it's very abstract. This is more of a controlled version of that. We are going to go over this maybe later with some pen and ink. So, you know, just do you. Try out the way you like it to look. I do have this nearby. I'm not going to try to match the colors. I'm just going to try to understand what I'm seeing here because this is so much more simplistic than this, just to kind of make out the shapes. So I do have this off to the side. Craft Studio is mostly very pale romantic pink and green, like dark hunter green accents. So I'm going to try to, even though I'll incorporate, you know, several colors, I'm going to try to keep that in mind as I'm painting along here. And so here I'm going to put a little pink. This would be like a permanent rose. And maybe soften it up with a little bit of a yellow and orange to give it a little more peachy pink color. I know you probably can't see much of this up there, huh? I'm getting there. A little more pink. Oh, that's getting there. That's pretty. Okay, before this water dries, let's just touch some of that in there. It's very pale, but it's very nice. I like it. Just what I was after. Okay, so slightly controlled, not too much. I'm going to take a little more darker shade of that same, so I'm adding a little more of that pink down at the bottom, just in these places where I think there would be shadow, because there's going to be something else overlapping there, and just let that kind of bloom out and do its thing. Try not to control it too much. That's hard. I jumped from this area over to here, and that's so that we don't have two wet areas side by side while I'm working. So now I'll jump over here where I know there's no paint or water. Yeah, I like that. I want that darker color in there because that leaf is behind. It's sort of coming from behind these flowers. Kind of, and you can pick your paper up and kind of encourage the flow. These other colors are still wet, so they're moving too. It's kind of fun. All right, we'll just do a periodic check-in here. I'm gonna put on some music and I'm gonna work through the rest of this. And I feel like without having the camera on and just being with the process, without the pressure of you watching me, I feel like I'm going to do a lot better. So I'll just do these check-ins as I get more complete with the painting. Okay, this is how it's looking. It's still drying. I hope you can see most of that. I'm pretty pleased with it. I have to decide if I want a background. I have to decide, do I want to do the pen and ink thing? I'm going to let this dry. I'm going to come back tomorrow and pick it back up and see how I feel about that. Alrighty, it is the next day. Everything is super duper dry, and I've just gone in with my soft eraser here and taken out any extra pencil lines. Clean that up a little bit, looks good. And now I need to decide, do I want to do the ink outlines or not? I like how it looks, but I feel like it needs something. But rather than just kind of go for it here, I'm going to work off of a color copy. I just took a picture with my phone and brought it into Photoshop and really lightened it up quite a bit, as you can see. And I have a ton of these different kind of art pens. I just seem to be a collector of them. I don't know if this part's going to matter too much, but I did test out to see which ones worked well, which ones were smooth, how thick, how thin, etc. So I picked a thicker one and a thinner one. Honestly, I think you could do this with a Sharpie permanent pen, like a fine point one. So this is a, in case you want to know, a Foodball 1.5. And this one, that's a Ranger. Well, I got it from Ranger, distributed by Ranger. It's a pigment ink. And then this one is a Uniball Signo. What else can I tell you? Oh, it's a 0.24. Anyway, it's super fine. So I don't know if I'll use it or not. Zoom in here and we'll give this a go. I don't know what I'm going to do exactly, but I'm going to use my Foodball, which has a bigger head to it, and I'm just going to start to trace, but very loosely. And you know what? I'm not going to pick up the pen. I'm just going to keep on trucking all around the design very loosely. I'm not going to stop. I'm just going to do like this. I think I like the look of that. Now, if I get to a place like that where I feel like I need to pick it up, I will. There's some certain places I think that you'll encounter where you'll be going over it like 3 or 4 times, and I don't think you really want to do that. But this is kind of fun. And again, I don't want to come back over, so I'll just go like that. And I would move a little slower, I think, on my actual piece, but just to kind of demonstrate that loose look. I think that that looks okay. I don't know if it takes away from the softness and the subtle like looseness by drawing those lines. Now, if I wanted to do something else, let's say, in this area with a finer pen. So first we'll just quickly go around like I've been doing. Now see, this is laser printed, so it's kind of got a little bit of a strange coating that's sort of resisting my pen a little bit. But let's say we just did this flower shape here. The more wiggly, the better, honestly, I think. You can even divide those areas. Okay, so if I was going to do that, and then I've got this flower shape here, this is where you might want to go in with a thinner one and maybe do some kind of line work, like sketchy, without thinking too much about it. You could follow some of these shadows and things that happened in your watercolor, the blooming. You could do some little squiggles and doodles. It's just something you can play with and see if you like it. So here's the other thing too. This is very small scale, and so a thick pen like that just really kind of takes away, I think, from the design. But if I use that same thickness on a bigger design, maybe it won't bother us too much. So maybe that's what I need to do. I need to blow this up closer to this size and see if I like it as just one more measure before I, go committing to the pen or not. Photocopy, much bigger, almost full size. Well, probably a little bit bigger, really. So let's just go for it. Let's see what it looks like. Decided I am going to go for it. I'm going to do the black outline. I didn't love how this was turning out, but I taped it to the wall over there. As you can see, a little removable tape, just to kind of see how that looked from afar, and I do like it. So to a different marker for this part, I found that the food ball was skipping around. It was having a hard time with that really toothy surface. This is a Le Pen permanent alcohol-based ink, and I'm looking for the size of this particular tip, and I don't see it. Number 1, perhaps. It's kind of thick. Can you see it? But it's like a painty, markery pen, so it's actually working out quite nicely. Here I am at the bottom, and I'm liking how that's looking. Finding works really well is if you, rather than holding your marker in your hand, your pen, very tightly like you would if you were trying to control it, is to scoot your hand up a little bit on the pen and just sort of have a very loose hand. Let it wiggle, let it do what it wants to do, and it's a little more organic, and you don't have that tight line control. It's very loose, kind of nice. I prefer this. This is better. Okay, and here is where I think that I will stop. I don't want to overdo it with too much black. I'm pretty happy with how it's looking. My last decision that I'll make here is, do I leave it just white or do I try to do some sort of background? I feel like the best way to determine whether it needs background or not is to actually put it back in the frame, and I feel like it needs it. I feel like the stark white makes it look very, I don't know, a little plain, a little homemade. So I want to put some sort of textural background to that, and I think I want to kind of match the pale pinky peach color of my wall. Just an extra piece that I had trimmed out my art with, and here's where I'm not super strong. I don't have a lot of paint. So I had this melon color and I also had white, of course, and I mixed those together to make a super duper pale peachy pink. And I'm just kind of testing it here. When I go straight from paint to paper, it's a little heavy, so I've got my water here, and that's what I'm going to mix over here. Is I'm just going to thin it down with water as I go. Now you might be saying, well, why don't you just use watercolor? You see how much paint I have here, right? You need a lot to do that background, and if you want it to stay the same color, it could be tricky if you're doing like a mix of watercolors to get that right shade that you want. It's a lot of paint. So I feel like just by watering this down, we'll get that same effect. And this is so nice because you can still see all that texture in the paper underneath, and when this dries it'll get just a little paler, so I think that's going to be perfect. What I'll do is I'll start with a very skinny brush and start in these places here. Can you see where I'm at down here? Let's move up here then. Let's go here. And I'll just get in there, and I'm going to try not at all to overlap the black. So even if that leaves a little bit of a white line, that's okay. And that looks good. So I'll just continue, and then as I get into more larger spaces, then I will come back with a little bit wider brush. Okay, I'm pleased, but I feel like I need to go one step further. So what I do like here is that by watering down that acrylic paint, it gives it sort of a watercolory effect. It's not a solid paint color, real thick going down, but I still feel like it's a little bit flat. So I was considering doing a little bit of stencil design, and I'm certainly not going to try that out right on my art. So I've grabbed a couple of stencils and that little scrap that I tested, and I got some white paint over here. And my thought is, in these tight little places in the artwork, I would use a smaller stencil, perhaps. And I'm going to go very light. I don't want this to be super white sitting on the pink paint. I just want it to be a subtle thing. And I'm using one of these kind of brushes here. This is a Dress My Craft like stencil brush, a little mini one. I guess I could swirl, but I feel like pouncing is better. So it's very subtle, very light. It looks like it's just sucking right into that paint. I'm going to try a different tool. This is from Waffle Flower. I just got these. It's very similar. The bristles are just shorter. I don't know if it'll make a big difference or not, but I just want to try them. A little different spot here. It seems a little better having shorter bristles, to be honest. Something about the longer bristles and the bending and stuff. And unless that's going to dry the same way, it looks a little bit darker. I kind of like that. So the question is it worth doing? Do we want to do it? I'm going to have to be very careful about placement. So I do have this bigger one for bigger spaces. It has a similar feel, very flourishy and pretty. I could put that into areas that have a bigger, wide open place to them. I think I'm just going to kind of go for it down here and try this corner. What's the worst that can happen? If we hate it, we can paint right over it. So I'm just not going to get too much paint on here, just very lightly. I'm going to come down here in the corner. Yeah, see, that's a little bit heavy, so I'm going to take the dry side and pull some of that up. I just want it to be very subtle. All right, well, that's interesting. I think I'm going to forge ahead and keep doing some more here. It is still drying. Everything's just a little bit tacky still, but I do like the background stenciling quite a bit. It looks a little heavy here in the video, but in person the white has been drying and kind of fading very softly into the background and has a less prominent look to it and a very nice background to it. So I'm going to set that aside to dry, go have some lunch, and then I'll get it back in the frame. Okay, we are done. It is in the frame, it is on the wall, and I am super pleased. Is it a total masterpiece? Maybe not, but I'm happy with it. To me, it's no different than working in an art journal, experimenting with color and markers and stencils and paint and textures. It was a great, fun experience and experiment. So I hope you enjoyed watching the process. I hope you maybe give it a try and realize it's not that difficult. So I'm going to just enjoy my little piece of art here, and I thank you for watching. I'll see you next week in the next crafty video.